Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
Hello, Mark. It's good to be back here after quite a hiatus due to the holidays, etc. But I'd like to jump right in and talk about the fact that many anti-Netanyahu voices are accusing him of having no strategy. This, by the way, is something that was mentioned recently in a recently published book by Bob Woodward of Watergate fame, who described a telephone call between Netanyahu and President Biden in April, during which Biden allegedly said, "What's your strategy, man? You have no strategy." Okay, now, so this has been a going theme throughout the war. And by the way, the anti-Netanyahu crowd is growing increasingly smaller in Israel. And it's precisely because he is showing strategy. And it's something that he outlined in his speech yesterday at the opening of the winter session of the Knesset. And he discussed his strategy. But we've been seeing it in action. And let's go with the latest biggest explosion of strategy, and that is Israel's attack on Iran on Friday night.
Can I just disagree with one thing you just said, and then we'll go in to discuss Israel's attack on Iran. But you said the anti-Netanyahu camp is getting smaller, and I'm not sure that's factual. The anti-Netanyahu camp is there. It's very strong, and I see no evidence of it getting smaller. What I do see evidence of is that the Prime Minister's numbers, and all the polls show this, the Prime Minister's numbers have been on the increase. And the people who love him always loved him, but apparently he's been successful in convincing some of the people that could go either way that he is maybe a good Prime Minister. But I don't think anyone who was seriously in the anti-Netanyahu camp has moved across. But that's just my take on things.
Okay, well, one thing, though, I will clarify here is, whether you call it the anti-Netanyahu camp or the anti-government camp or whatever you want to call it, what we know now is that after October 7th, when there was great disillusionment, including on the right, on the left, everywhere, with what happened, in the last few months, Israelis are expressing greater and greater faith in the government, in its behavior, in its attempt and so far success in winning the war.
No, that's in all the polls. All the polls show that the Likud numbers are going up and the opposition's numbers have been going in the opposite direction. And when they do polls specifically about a preferred candidate for prime minister, so Netanyahu has consistently beaten Yair Lapid over the last few months. But there's been a flip here because there was a time when Benny Gantz, the leader of what used to be called Blue and White, was higher than Netanyahu, and that has flipped. And Netanyahu, according to all the polls that I've seen, is the preferred candidate. It doesn't mean, who knows when the election will be and what the results will be. We don't have to legally have elections until 2026. But it appears clearly that Netanyahu's numbers are going up. But the anti-Netanyahu camp, those people who hate him, who think he's the worst thing that ever happened to Israel, they are as vocal and as vibrant. And I haven't yet seen anyone say, well, I was in the anti-Netanyahu camp and now I support him. I think
that's true. Yeah. That's true. But by the way, it's interesting that Israel is behaving as though it's in an election year. You mentioned that actually the next election is slated for 2026. It's almost as though we're emulating America. America actually is in an election cycle. Not only that, it's the actual election is taking place in less than a week. And Israelis are constantly doing polls and talking about it as though we're about to have an election, which we're not. So you're right, and it could all turn around. One thing we know is that any successes in the war and successes, and if we really do achieve absolute victory, that will be an increase in morale and support for this government like nobody's ever seen. And if we don't win the war, there will be mass disillusionment. But that brings us to the attack on Iran. It just happened on Friday night.
I remember, I have to tell you, I was sleeping very well Friday night, and I wake up early, and I go to my cell phone and hear the latest news broadcast, and I learn that Israel had attacked Iran in the middle of the night, but I understand that you were actually awake for the attack?
I was awake the whole time, but here's the irony. The news of the attack started to emerge on social media and elsewhere around 2 a.m. I would say
Israel time. And you were awake?
Time. I was awake, and at about, I would say a few minutes beforehand, I said, okay, I'm saturated with the news. I've been writing and reading and watching the news on television enough already. So I turned the channel to Netflix to watch what I really like to watch, and that's true crime on serial killers and everything. And I'm sitting there watching that, and I get a phone call from New York from my brother. And my brother says, so what's going on? And I said, nothing. And he said, you're attacking Iran. What do you mean nothing? And I said, we are. Immediately, I said, you see, if I turn my head for 5 minutes, something big happened. So
can I just tell you?
Yes.
You've got a brother in New York. I have a brother in Melbourne, Australia, where there's also this huge time difference. He would never ring me at 2 a.m. to tell me something on the news because he knows that's when I'm asleep. He would your brother wakes you up in the middle of the night?
A, my brother figured I wasn't asleep because he knows me. B, for news like that, he knows I would have wanted to be
woken?
Yes, he would know that. And C, if I had been deeply asleep, I wouldn't have answered. That's all. Those are the three possibilities. But what happened then was, so I turned on the television, I started to watch it, and then interview requests from foreign media came flowing in. Now, keep in mind, this was a Friday night at an hour when most Israelis were asleep. And when any Shabbat observant person was, whether asleep or not, was not turning on any devices. So it had this weird feeling that only some of us knew what was going on if we weren't outside the country. And I got all these interview requests to say, what's going on? What's going on? I said what I knew. And then at around 6 a.m., when it was over, it was announced that, okay, all our planes had returned safely to Israel. We're done. And initially, I was extremely disappointed. I acknowledge it. I was, oh no, that was a nothing burger. But as the hours progressed and more information came in, I totally changed my mind. I said, I'm like, it was brilliant. It was an attack that was totally necessary for any future attacks we need to launch on the Islamic Republic. There's no question about it. We managed to launch an attack that did not piss off Washington because we didn't directly hit oil or nuclear facilities. And we did something that was necessary to send a message to Iran and to all its proxies. But also we proved that Iran isn't as strong as it's always claiming to be and as we're always afraid. And now what we did, we disabled its air defenses.
And apparently, I mean, they spent a lot of time and effort to get these Russian SS-200 and SS-300, I said that incorrectly. It's the S-200, it's the S-300, these sort of very developed Russian anti-aircraft systems, and then we destroy them, which means Iran has to feel as if it's naked before the mirror because Israel can now hit whatever it wants in Iran, and that is a very important message that was sent to Iran. The second thing that I think is important is apparently of the targets we did hit, and I'm speaking from media reports, but we hit their missile production site zones. We hit other elements of their military machine, and I think that's also terribly important. And we spoke about this, I think, last week. We didn't hit innocent civilians. The Iranian people do not like their government. I remember saying on this podcast that we don't want to do something that would push the Iranian people who despise their government to push them behind the government. No, that didn't happen. I thought we were very smart. But you actually said something very interesting that I haven't heard you say before on this podcast. You seemed to say it was the right thing that we could do the attack without annoying Washington. You've, in the past many times, sort of said, screw Washington. We should do what we need. But you are finally coming around to the Regev point of view. And I will quote the Prime Minister who said, when you can agree with the Americans, right, when they ask you to do something, and it's best to do it if you can, consider their concerns. If you have to disagree, but it's best if you can agree. So are you coming around to that the alliance with America is worthy of us to take into serious consideration before we make our choices?
Not entirely. And I'll tell you what I mean.
Right.
Had this attack been the disappointing one I initially thought it was when it was over, it happened.
Because that's your predisposition. Your predisposition is to say it's never strong enough.
That's true. But it's based on experience, that predisposition, okay? It's not just out of thin air, okay? But in this case, I would say that because we were able to do something that is incredibly important, and it's not that it's great that we didn't piss off Washington. I really don't care, and I especially don't care pissing off the Biden administration that has been behaving abominably throughout this latest period, including being annoyed at things it should embrace. And that includes, which we'll get to in a minute, Israel's vote to ban UNRWA from the country. And even, the Biden administration is expressing concern, as usual, with things it should welcome and champion. But this is what brings us the UNRWA issue, by the way, is...
Can we just do Iran before? I want to say something.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we go on, we'll do UNRWA in a second, but let's discuss Iran for one more minute. My understanding, and this is very important, everyone's now waiting to see if Iran responds to Israel's strike. And some people say they will, and some people say they won't. Obviously, we have to prepare for an attack. And if there is an Iranian attack, we will definitely respond. And it's clear to me that not only are we've destroyed their missile defenses and we can hit them very hard and so forth.
Exactly.
But I think, is it not possible then, because we showed, from the American perspective, we showed restraint, and the Americans have said publicly they have no justification whatsoever to hit back. If they nevertheless do so, will Israel have a green light to hit back much harder? Will we have a green light to hit back against nuclear sites, against other sites in Iran? And I would remind you that if, you said it's political season in America, if this is all going to happen after the election, does that make a harsh Israeli response more probable because the Americans will be less concerned about possible electoral consequences of an Israeli strike? Well,
I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know one thing that I've heard from experts is that while that the nuclear sites are very spread out, Iran is huge, the sites are spread out and deep underground, and that we may not have the proper bunker busters to actually hit them, or most of them, or the crucial ones. And that's where America comes in and where we would need America. But that's where we need a strong America who believes in American power, not just Israeli power. Again, all of the criticism I have of the administration has to do with its relinquishing its status as the world's great superpower and a moral authority. It has totally given up on that. And that is why Israel was in danger. If that's your umbrella, you're in big trouble, especially when you're attacked on all fronts by radical Islamists.
Could you argue, I'll give you an optimistic scenario. The president, no matter who wins the election, he will be in, lame duck period from the election through to January 20th.
No matter who wins. Joe Biden is president until January 20th.
Correct. And so, then he's unconstrained from internal political concerns, and it's many ways legacy time for him. On the assumption that the big challenges facing the United States in the coming century is Russia, China, so forth, could he think, I will now use that last month and a half on the job to do something serious about Iran so that the next president doesn't have to take those serious decisions?
Well, he could. First of all, if he's capable of making any decisions. So if you're talking about Biden as Biden specifically, or as Biden with a group of people around him being his puppeteers, that I don't know. But I can say, judging by how anxious he was when he became president to return to the Iran deal, I don't think that he wants to attack Iran. This is not their idea. Oh, they never wanted to prevent Iran from getting a bomb. They said so. But then they gave them money. They eased up on sanctions. This is not the behavior of an administration that was trying to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
Obviously, I don't know what's in the president's mind. But here's an administration that, as you said, came into office and tried to return to the deal, the Obama deal.
Begged to.
Yes. And despite all their best efforts, right, they couldn't get a deal with the Iranians. Right? They tried very hard, and the Iranians just showed themselves to have an outlet. This is an administration that says, and I believe they say President Biden has said, we won't allow the Iranians to get a weapon, a nuclear weapon. It won't happen on my watch. So it's not going to happen on their watch anyway, apparently. I just think every time Biden speaks, he says, I'm a proud Irish Catholic Zionist, correct? He says that. And I'm just trying to think, is it, maybe I'm being optimistic to think that he would consider, I'm not saying out of the blue, but let's say the Iranians did hit us back and Israel raised the nuclear issue. And here I want to say something important. You said to me, and I don't know what the facts are, but you said to me it's doubtful if Israel could totally destroy the Iranian nuclear program because it's spread out and it's underground.
No, by itself, without America.
Correct.
No, not that that's impossible.
Yes.
But it depends on what kind of bunker busters we have.
I understand that.
And there is where I do not have any inside
I want to remind you of something I think we discussed in this podcast in the past, but for Israel, that doesn't have to be a reason not to do something. Why? There's the famous discussion in 1981 inside the Israeli Security Cabinet whether Israel should strike Saddam Hussein's nuclear facilities. And at the time, the Prime Minister was advised by parts of the national security
not to do it.
Not to do it because they said, look, you can destroy maybe the reactor, but the best thing is you buy time because he'll rebuild the reactor. The Russians will help him do it. The French will help him do it. You buy time, and it's a very risky operation, and you could lose pilots. All these things could go wrong. You'll be condemned by the United States. You'll be condemned, and you only get short term.
Then it's not worth it. Right.
It's not worth it. But in the end, Begin did it correctly, of course. He did it. And in the end, the Iraqis never managed to reconstitute their program.
By the way, the same thing with Almert and the Syrian reactor, the same thing. But there is a difference because that was sort of located in one area. I'm talking about in Iran, it's different because there isn't a reactor located in one place.
But if you can hit a choke point.
Yes, absolutely.
Then
and yes,
worth doing.
And we should do it. And no, I don't care whether somebody else gives us legitimacy. I'm sick and tired of that. The legitimacy is born of the fact that we are in a war of survival, or what Prime Minister Netanyahu calls now revival. And that's what's important. Now, that's why what the strategy I began by mentioning has to do with, okay, so we're disabling Hamas, we're disabling Hezbollah, and now we're going for Iran. It's a little bit like we did with the Hezbollah leaders. We went first from the lower tiers up to the top of the pyramid with the leadership, knocking them out one by one.
When the Prime Minister spoke in the Knesset this week, when he talked about, what is my strategy, he did emphasize not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But you're correct. He spoke about victory in the south. He spoke about defeating Hezbollah in the north. And it's clear over the last few weeks, his strategy has become crystal clear.
And expanding the Abraham Accords, which he has always said he was going to do. And
that's very interesting. Not only did you say maybe we did the right thing listening to American advice on Iran, but you've also just said you're supporting peace with the Arab neighbors.
Oh, I supported the Abraham Accords all along.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong there, okay? Because the Abraham Accords was the first time when the Palestinians were not mentioned. Too bad, guys. Okay, you want to join these peace accords? You're welcome. This peace does not run through the Palestinians. That's what was the beauty of the Abraham Accords.
And if we get a deal with Saudi Arabia, and I want to deal with Saudi Arabia, we had to pay a certain, we had to tick the Palestinian box, so to speak. We had to do that. And we did it by giving up formally on the idea to annex parts of the West Bank. And so it's clear to you that if there is a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, there'll have to be some sort of Palestinian element, even if it's just ticking the box.
I don't know about that. If there is, we'll have to go through this whole cycle all over again. I mean, that's another question right now. But the main point about this strategy is that you kill off the enemies and you make peace with people who are willing to make peace with you because you're the strong horse in the region and because you're Shiite, Iranian. That's good. Okay, you have an axis. And at the moment, those Abraham Accords countries are hedging their bets. They're waiting to see, etc. Again, now we have to talk about it. It's like saying what you're talking about, this diplomacy kind of thing. It's what we're seeing here is that Netanyahu, it's not that I support kowtowing to Washington. No, I just said the beauty of it was we didn't even have to piss them off. And we did this beautiful thing that enables us and anybody else to attack the nuclear facilities or the oil facilities. It enables us to do it. And that's the thing that we didn't have before. The danger was, how are we going to do this? It's 1,000 miles to go from Israel to Iran. We have to refuel in the air. How will we do that without getting our plane shot down? How will we do this without endangering, et cetera, et cetera? But, and so we enabled it. They're now blind and they can't do anything about it. That's brilliant. And this would be a great time for America to say, great, now we can do it with less risk. But America won't do it. The other thing that I think, okay, we see Netanyahu engaging in diplomacy in which I do not believe, by the way. They're talking to Amos Hochstein from America with Hezbollah in Lebanon and sending the head of the Mossad to Doha to talk with some non-existent Hamas entity to talk about releasing the hostages. Now, the reason Netanyahu, I assume the reason he's doing that is because A, he's getting pressure from the Biden administration, and B, he's getting a lot of pressure from the families of the hostages, and C, from the Israelis who want to move back to their homes in northern Israel. He's getting a lot of pressure. And basically, my theory is what he's doing is saying, fine, all avenues, go pursue all avenues. But we know deep down that those avenues, those talking with terrorist organizations, never works. All it does is bring more war, more abductees, more tunnels, more terrorism. We know it doesn't work. So what we've got to keep doing is fighting, fighting, and fighting. And by the way, our soldiers and reservists believe that. The head of the army doesn't always. Our defense minister is a little bit, The soldiers are willing to fight and I don't like to say fight to the death because unfortunately many are dying. I mean, fight tooth and nail to rescue the hostages, make Gaza safer for anyone who lives in Israel, to make Lebanon no longer pose a threat, etc. So this is what we're doing now, and what we're seeing is we're on a path to victory. And don't believe the naysayers who are constantly saying, no, and we didn't really do anything, are not really doing anything, and there's no strategy. There really is a strategy. And, again, most Israelis, it's no accident that most Israelis are hoping that Trump wins the election, mainly because they saw how he behaved towards Israel when he was president. That's basically what it boils down to.
So I want to respond to a few of the things you said. First of all, you're 100% correct. The war is costing Israel a lot of lives. I think since we spoke last week, more than 20 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Lebanon and in Gaza. And in your son's unit, you were telling me off camera, there were people killed. It's difficult. But I think the Israeli public looks at these casualties and they say this is, unfortunately, a necessary price to pay for our security, right? Because we can't allow Hamas and Hezbollah to win this war. And you're 100% right when you say the troops on the ground know why they're fighting. They understand the importance of their mission. A lot of them are doing reserve duty for the second, third, some for the fourth time. My daughter's been called up again to reserve service. You're 100% correct when you say there is a motivation amongst the soldiers in the field to finish the job. You said something I want to disagree with. You talked about Gallant being lukewarm, the defense minister. Gallant said something that I think is true from strategic point of view. He said that not every problem has a military solution, that the military can do many, many things, but there are some things that you need to do through diplomacy. The military can create new realities, which makes diplomacy more forthcoming. It's Clausewitz's, famous quote that war is politics by other means, and I think that should always be remembered. You said, and I'm quoting you, you said negotiations with terrorists never work. In November, we negotiated with terrorists and we got over 100 people out, right, from a hostage deal. And what's interesting, what's going on now in the hostage deal is people are seemingly not talking about a total deal. They're talking about a very temporary ceasefire for a limited release of live hostages. And the numbers change according to the reports. But I think that could be doable. And everyone we get out, to use a Jewish word, that's a mitzvah. Everyone we can get out, and that's a price worth paying.
All right. Well, by the way, I just want to take issue with two things here. One is, I don't want my defense minister saying military is not the only means to achieve things, okay? Yes, that may be true. That may be very well true. And if our foreign minister says it, that's fine with me. We are in the middle of a war, and I am sick and tired of having a defense minister and a chief of staff and a army spokesperson who, throughout the war, has forgotten that what its lane is. You know how we say stay in your lane? I don't need my defense minister defending diplomacy. Not your job, okay? Your job, win a war, victory, aim for it, okay? Other people can talk about when you do that, and there's not everything has a military solution. Okay, we know that sentence, and that is something that's a slogan that Israelis love to spew all throughout the decades, okay? I don't need the defense minister saying not everything has a military solution. Okay, that's your job is the military solution.
But can I say something? When we look at Lebanon, and you raised this before, and you said Amos Hochstein is back in Israel, or coming back to Israel, I should say, and is trying to get a deal on Lebanon. In the end, let's be clear, Israel is not going to occupy all of Lebanon. Israel is not going to destroy every single last terrorist in Lebanon. In the end, there will be a deal. Now, it'll be a better deal than before, hopefully, because we will have destroyed Hezbollah's infrastructure in southern Lebanon. We would have hit the organization and hit them hard. We've taken out their leadership. We've taken out their commanders. It'll be a different reality, but that new reality will be conducive to getting what ultimately is a deal. There was a leak, I don't know if it's true or not, from the Israeli cabinet. It was reported this morning in the Israeli media that says we are going to insist that there be controls on the Syrian-Lebanese border to prevent Hezbollah from rearming.
Well, exactly.
And all these things. Now, in the end, there will have to be a deal. The military is fighting to make that deal a good deal for Israel.
Okay, so the word deal is problematic here.
Okay,
so every
arrangement.
war ends in a deal. Every war. Okay. That we know that. And when you mentioned the deal that returned half of the hostages in November, just remember, okay, yes, and that's why we agreed to it. But why did Hamas stop it before the last?
Military pressure.
No. Why it stopped the deal? Why did Hamas stop right before releasing its last amount of hostages? Because it realized that it had mistakenly believed that pressure from in Israel and outside of Israel would cause Netanyahu to cease fire, end the war, and leave Hamas in power. That is why Sinwar agreed to that whole hostage deal in 3 phases. He agreed to it because he was sure. He says, I know those Israelis. They're always fighting, and they fought about judicial reform. There is no way that with all those hostages we're holding, Israelis will say that it's okay to continue the war. And he was wrong. And when he realized he was wrong, he said, okay, no more hostages. And that's where we are today, even though he's dead. Now, it's important, again, to mention that we need more military pressure on Hamas. Why? Because it's true. Sinwar is dead, and Hamas is all dispersed. It's got militias and guerrilla groups holding hostages. But one thing we know, there's a reason why our offer to those people holding hostages, if you would just release them to return them, we'll give you, we'll let you live, we'll let you leave Gaza, we'll give you money. Why so far, in the last 2 weeks, nothing has come of that. And there is a reason for that. Because the Gazans are still afraid that Hamas is going to rise from its ashes because it's not completely dead. Okay, so they're afraid, they're terrified, and they're not going to do anything until they make sure that they're safe. And here is why we have to keep killing and killing and killing more terrorists, which we're doing. And we did see this week 600 Hamas terrorists surrendered after we encircled the area they were in. And when they surrendered, and those were the terrorists shooting at the civilians trying to get to safe spaces. Now, the fact that they surrendered is a great sign, because it means they feel that there's nowhere for them to go now. And now we've got them, and now we can get information out of them, etc. Point being, only military pressure, only has seen any kind of success. And anytime we let up and we show weakness and we show protests in the streets on our television stations morning till night, that prevents us from getting closer to our goals. It doesn't help our goals. It prevents them.
No, I would come back with you on that point, but we're coming to the end of our program, and we promised a few minutes about UNRWA before we leave.
Very important.
And so the Knesset, with an overwhelming supermajority, passed the legislation saying that UNRWA should no longer function in Israel, can no longer function in Israel. 90 days, I believe. They have to close down their representation in Israel. And this decision has been condemned by many, and even our friends, the United States, have been a little wary about this decision by Israel. And the major serious complaint is that, well, UNRWA provides all this humanitarian support for Gaza, and if UNRWA doesn't do it, everyone's going to starve in Gaza and so forth. This is the criticism. But the point is, UNRWA has been infiltrated by Hamas through and through. And it's like saying, oh, you can't touch UNRWA because it provides aid, and therefore they can do whatever they want, and Hamas can take it over, and that's okay. No, it's not okay. The minute we start talking about not working with UNRWA, we can create alternatives to UNRWA. But as long as you say you can't touch UNRWA, there'll never be an alternative. It becomes a catch-22.
Exactly. And by the way, just again, I have to add something to that, because it's worse than just that UNRWA is not good and taken over by Hamas. Active participants in the October 7th massacre, active holders of hostages in their homes, UNRWA teachers teaching children in Gaza to kill Jews, UNRWA teachers in Israel teaching children horrific things, glorifying martyrdom. UNRWA is evil. UNRWA is Hamas. And why anybody in any country, we know why the UN is also filled with terror sympathizers, but UNRWA has no business existing, and especially not all the money it gets. And all it does, even if there are UNRWA employees who are not terrorists, what do? They say, okay, fine, we can't, there's nothing we can do. They bring in aid. Hamas commandeers it, sells it for huge amounts of money to hungry Palestinians. Israel gets blamed. UNRWA has no business existing on the planet, let alone in Israel. And interestingly, even the opposition parties voted to ban it. The only Knesset members who didn't agree with that bill were Arab Knesset members.
No, there are, you have to be clear. There are members of Arab parties who are either communists or Islamists. It's not because they're Arabs. It's because of their ideology.
It's okay.
Right?
Semantics. Okay.
Or Arab nationalists, Palestinian nationalists like Ahmed Tibi and so forth. Yes, but they definitely have an agenda, and they support UNRWA as being what it is.
They support UNRWA, and they are anti-Israel, even though they get.
Look, the biggest problem with UNRWA.
tax shekels pay their salaries and their pensions.
That's part of democracy, unfortunately. No, I don't say unfortunately. That's part of democracy, right? You can have opinions that we don't agree with. But let me say clearly here.
Okay.
What is the ultimate absurdity of UNRWA? And this even, I think, UNRWA's, all the people who are crying crocodile tears today for UNRWA, what's going to happen, right? There's a refugee organization of the United Nations that deals with all the world's refugees. It doesn't matter if you're from Cambodia or from Syria or from someplace, I don't know, in Africa. And there's a separate, wholly special UN agency that only works with Palestinian refugees. And the question is why?
To perpetuate their refugee status. Because their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, whoever, there is no such thing.
The UN usually works to resettle refugees.
Exactly.
UNRWA makes a deliberate policy decision. We perpetuate people's refugee status because that's their whole raison d'etre. That's their reason for being. And that in itself is a reason for UNRWA to go. And You can't ignore the fact, and we've seen it throughout this war, it has been infiltrated totally by Hamas. You see that in the Hamas, the terrorists of October 7th who remembers.
Right.
You see that in the WhatsApp group of the teachers that applauded the terrorist atrocities of October 7th. You see that in the hostages that came back in the first release and said, we were held in the homes of UNRWA personnel. The list goes on and on. And this organization deserves to be banned, not just by Israel.
And as you know, I think so does the whole UN. Every UN body there can just go to you-know-where. That's how I feel. But UNRWA especially, it's a good start. On that cheerful note.
We will say goodbye until next week.
Okay, Mark. See you next week.
See you then.